Hello and welcome to the Wisp Sports Desk. I'm Nancy Gillen. This is episode 42 of season 3 and we're coming to the end of the year, but we've got still a whole host of women's sports stories. Doesn't look like they're calming down for the year at all. So to get straight into the news, it's the winter sports season. So we've got the Winter Olympics coming up in February, and subsequently a lot of the athletes are out competing in their World Cups of their respective disciplines and trying to get into good Olympic form. One such athlete is the American previously bobsleigh athlete Elana Meyers Taylor. So she was a 3-time Olympic medalist in the bobsled, which is a 2-woman event. But she will, this in Beijing in February, should be competing in the monobob event, which is brand new for women's in women's winter sport. And as the name suggests, it's a 1-woman event. So she won't be competing with her normal partner, Kaillie Humphries. So the first monobob World Cup event happened this weekend, which Elana Meyers Taylor triumphed in. She beat world champion Kaillie Humphries, who was second, and then Laura Nolt, the German athlete, was third. Very significant victory for Meyers Taylor because it's her first win as a mother. So she gave birth to her son Nico last year, I think during the World Championships at the time. So she took all of 2019 and 20 season off. I think had quite a dramatic birth, but now she's back competing, and like I said, will be looking to make an impact in that monobob event at the Olympics. Continuing on with winter sports, over on the ski slopes, there's Petra Vlhova, the Slovakian skier. She's off the mark for this season with her first win in the slalom. So they're competing in Levi, the competition Levi Black. And yeah, she's having a decent season so far because that victory put her in first place in the overall ranking. Mikaela Shiffrin, the world famous alpine skier, finished second. She's back on the slopes after quite a fragmented kind of couple of years. Her dad died at the start of 2020, and then she was also had suffered with injury and stuff, so she was kind of had a bit of a dip in form while she took time to recover. But yeah, she's now back on the slopes and finishing second in that race. And then Lena the German skier, finished third. Vlhova, I think she's used to winning on this course, and at that World Cup they give a reindeer as a prize, so it's actually the 5th reindeer that she's won. Obviously quite a unique prize, and she's said that she's named the reindeer Boris after her brother, so that's quite a fun fact. Moving on to football now, a fair bit of football news this week. First, it was the NWSL Championship in the US. So kind of it's quite an interesting format in the US because you've got the league table and the team that wins the league, but then the top 4 teams go into a playoff and then ultimately play in the championship match, which is what took place at the weekend. So Washington Spirit triumphed in that match. They won 2-1. They were playing Chicago Red Stars, who actually went 1-0 up initially in the dying minutes of the first half. But then Andy Sullivan scored in the second half for Washington Spirit, and Kelly O'Hara, the game went into extra time, and Kelly O'Hara got the winner in extra time. I didn't get to watch the match because it's the time difference makes that quite difficult. But I heard Trinity Rodman, one of the younger American players, she had a really, really good game. And yeah, people rave about her as a player. So I think that's, having such a good game in a big match can only kind of increase her value and increase how good people think she is. It's quite an interesting team to win because they've had quite a turbulent season. They've been one of the many teams affected by the abuse allegations taking place in the NWSL. So the former head coach, Richie Burke, he was fired in September after an investigation into allegations of harassment and toxic work culture. And he is actually shockingly one of several NWSL head coaches to lose their jobs over abuse claims. So there's been 9 out of 10 NWSL clubs have undergone a coaching change this year for various reasons, but a lot of that is to do with the abuse allegations. And today there was yet another kind of story about this regarding Chicago Red Stars. And the other team in the NWSL Championship, so the team Washington Spirit were playing, and their coach Rory Dames resigned yesterday because of an investigation by the Washington Post into allegations of abusive behaviour. One of the kind of most high-profile players who spoke out about this is Kristen Press, the American forward, who obviously a massive star for the American national team, but she's also, played it over here in England for Man United, and probably one of the biggest names, I think, in women's football around the world. So she played for Chicago Red Stars under Rory Dames from 2014 to 2017. And she kind of quite repeatedly voiced her concerns about him to US Soccer, the Federation for Football in America. And she eventually, her concerns were dismissed, but she eventually sparked an investigation into Dames. But US Soccer basically took no action whatsoever. So he obviously stayed in his place. So some of the allegations include claims of verbal attacks, inappropriate out-of-hours communication, comments on players' appearances, and inappropriate jokes about players' ethnicity and religion. And there's quite a few, a number of players that have raised those concerns. So, I think both teams there that played in that NWSL Championship have been quite heavily affected by those abuse allegations. But like I said, it's almost kind of the norm to be at this stage because so many coaches are implicated in this. And I think it also calls into question, the failure of NWSL, but then also US Soccer as well to kind of take action against these allegations. So, for instance, the US Soccer knew about the allegations about Rory Dames in 2014. There's another coach, Paul Riley, who was accused of sexual misconduct allegations, and the clubs that hired him and the NWSL knew about those claims against him in 2015 and 2016. And then going back to Washington Spirit, their head coach, Richie Burke, they knew about the allegations against him before they hired him in late 2018. So it's kind of this building this idea that just, these players, these horrible things happen to them and they raise their concerns, but they're not really taken into account and no one listens to them. And the people that are doing the behaviour, they don't face any kind of consequence and just continue in their jobs. So it's great this is all coming to light now. And, as awful as it is, I'm hoping that it means it prevents similar things happening in the future. But the NWSL at the moment is in crisis slightly. Despite this, there is a more positive story about the NWSL in that they've now Nike, the massive clothing company, has extended its partnership with the NWSL right until 2030. So for another 9 years, really, which is quite significant. Normally when you hear of these sponsorship deals, it's kind of 3 or 4 years at a time. But this is nearly a 10-year deal. So Nike was initially a founding partner of the NWSL in 2012, has extended its partnership since and then extended it once again, and essentially supplies the teams with uniforms, apparel and equipment. So very significant partnership there. And like I said, kind of one of the biggest sports brands in the world. So it kind of really gives credibility to the league. Going over to England, some good news from Arsenal, which is great for me because that is the team I support. So Vivian Miedema, she's the Dutch striker who plays for Arsenal. She's only 24, 25. She's already broken kind of a whole host of records during her career. But she's recently, during Arsenal's 2-0 win against Manchester United at the weekend, she scored the opening goal. And she became the first player in WSL history to score against every team that Arsenal have played against, which is quite an incredible stat, really. It shows, I think sometimes strikers will have a certain team or a certain system that they feel like, they can't play against or they don't really do well, maybe like a bit of a bogey team. But Miedema clearly doesn't have that. And she's just going from strength to strength and will probably eventually run out of records that she can actually break. So interested to see how that one plays out. Going back over to the US, but changing sport. So going over to USA Women's Rugby Sevens, Emilie Bydwell has been selected as the head coach of the national team. So it was a 5-person selection panel that made the decision and it was unanimous. So they sound very confident in that Bydwell can do the right job. She is very experienced within the USA rugby system. So she was actually interim head coach for the senior women's sevens team when they competed at the World Rugby Sevens Fast 4 tournament in Canada. And also was there during the Pan American Games when the US finished with a silver medal. And she's also been quite integral in the development of the women's sevens pathways as well, which I think is quite important because obviously she understands the significance of developing women's rugby sevens and the significance of kind of, getting younger girls involved and bringing them up through the system. So that's positive. She said that it's the honour of her career to be selected for the position. And she's been working towards the dream of coaching this team and leading this program for over a decade. She also said that the US women's sevens team is more than a rugby team. It's a group of incredible women that have the power to inspire meaningful change in their communities. She's also mentioned the potential of gold medal performances. So she obviously has very high hopes for the team. And it sounds like a really good appointment. Now going on to some Parasport news. The women's Paracanoe VL3 is going to make its debut at the Paris 2024 Olympics. By adding this discipline, the International Canoe Federation has essentially achieved gender equality in Paracanoe by the Olympics, which is really great. And, it's kind of Paris 2024 in both the Olympics and the Paralympics has been pitched as, it's going to be the games where true gender equality is achieved and you've got like a 50-50 balance of female and male athletes. So it's great to see that extended to Paracanoe, where both men and women will now have the chance to compete in 5 events. The International Paralympic Committee also confirmed an extra 10 athlete quotas would be made available for Paracanoe as well. So the size of the event with that additional discipline has also now increased. Sticking with the Olympics, it's quite an interesting story on the policy on transgender athletes. Obviously, this is something that has been very topical at the moment. I think interest in it kind of spiked quite a lot at Tokyo 2020 when Laurel Hubbard, the New Zealand weightlifter, she competed. And I think, became the first transgender athlete to compete, I think, in an individual event at the Games. Made history there. So the IOC have released essentially a new kind of framework for transgender athletes. They have made it quite clear that it's kind of guidance as opposed to rule or regulation. So they've kind of set out these guidelines and then they're putting the onus on the individual sport federations and governing bodies to come up with their own rules. So even though the IOC is saying this, it doesn't mean that every international federation is going to enact what they're suggesting. And so you will probably likely see sports kind of diverging from what the IOC have said. But essentially, they have said that transgender women should no longer be required to reduce their testosterone levels to compete in the women's sport category. And it also concludes that there should be no presumption that trans women have an automatic advantage over natal women, which essentially reverses the IOC's previous position. So previously, say athletes like Laurel Hubbard took testosterone reducing medication, so they could she could compete in the limit that the IOC had set out. That's now reversed. But like I said, it's all, I'm not really expecting every international federation to change their rules to fit that, because very much in these guidelines, the IOC, like I said, put the onus on individual federations. So the IOC medical director, Richard Budgett, he said, what we're saying now is you don't need to use testosterone at all, but this guidance is not an absolute rule. So we can't say that the framework in any sport, such as world athletics, is actually wrong. They need to make it right for their sport, and this framework gives them a process by which they can do it, thinking about inclusion and then seeing what produces disproportionate advantage. So I think, this whole idea is that they're really trying to push inclusion and make sure that they're not essentially kind of excluding transgender women from competing in sport. This framework also applies to athletes with differences of sex development. The most notable athlete with that is Casa Semenya, who is obviously very, very well known. She is currently unable to compete in distances, I think it's 400 meters to a mile, because of World Athletics policies on athletes with DSD, which requires athletes with above a certain testosterone threshold to take testosterone reducing medication, which Semenya refuses to do. So she essentially can't compete. The new IOC's new framework basically says, because it says that kind of testosterone is now irrelevant almost, it essentially advises World Athletics to get rid of the rule that prevents Casa Semenya from running in her preferred distances. But the Guardian contacted World Athletics to see what they would be doing about this, and they've said to the Guardian that they have no plans to change its rules. So despite this new framework, it's still expected that athletes such as Casa Semenya will still be prevented from running in her preferred distances, which I think is probably quite controversial. I think as we kind of see how different federations interpret this and decide what they want to do about it, there could be some controversy, because you might have one sport which, allows certain athletes to compete, and then other sports which don't. And potentially maybe some athletes will see that as unfair. Some good news in the world of tennis. We've the news that Ashley Barty, the world number one, she's now engaged to golfer Gary Kissick. So that's really positive, really great, happy news for her, and congrats to her. She's had an incredible year, ending as world number one, winning Wimbledon, and she kind of called her season early. So she didn't compete in the WTA finals. She decided she wanted to go home. And the quarantine restrictions in Australia meant that it was easier for her to go home and just recover there, and then go into pre-season for the Australian Open. So, she's obviously having a lovely time at home because she's now engaged. So, congratulations to her. And then our final story today comes from World Athletics. So they've announced the 5 finalists for Female World Athlete of the Year. They had released a longer list of 10 athletes, but have somehow a very hard job of cutting it down to 5, but they've managed it. So Stephan Hassan of the Netherlands, she's been nominated after becoming the 5,000 metre and 10,000 metre Olympic champion the 1500 meter Olympic bronze medalist, and then she also broke the world 10,000 meter record. So she's just basically shown that she's incredible over a range of distances, which is very, very hard to do. Then we've got Faith Kipyego from Kenya. She beat Hassan to the gold medal. She got the gold medal in the 1500 meter race at the Olympics. She's also the Diamond League champion over the same distance and holds the Kenyan record over that distance as well. Sydney McLaughlin from the US. She's the Olympic 400 meter hurdles champion. She also won gold in the 4x400 meters and then set 2 world 400 meter hurdle records. Yolimar Rojas from Venezuela, another Olympic champion and world record holder. So she's the Olympic triple jump champion, the Diamond League triple jump champion, and the world triple jump holds the world triple jump record. And then the final athlete on the list is Elaine Thompson-Herah, the Jamaican sprinter, who had an incredible Olympic Games. She won gold in the 100 meters, 200 meters, and 4x100 meters. She's also the Diamond League 100 meters champion. It holds the national record. So in Jamaica, that's a hard task. She holds the national records for the 100 and 200 meter sprints. And she also has the second fastest 100 meter sprint of all time. So this year there was such a kind of great face-off between Thompson-Herah and her fellow Jamaican sprinter, Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce. And yeah, Thompson-Herah, I mean, but Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce is a great sprinter, but Thompson-Herah kept beating her, and they kept just kind of essentially just kind of that rivalry was there. It kept pushing them both along. And yeah, Thompson-Herah has had a better year, probably because of that rivalry with Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce pushing her even further. So for me, I think my favourites to win is probably either Stephan Hassan, just because I think of the versatility she shows, just how she's so successful over such a range of distances. And then for me, Elaine Thompson-Herah as well, I think has had an incredible year. I think it's quite hard to choose between them. I think the fact that the 100 metres is such an iconic event, I think Thompson-Herah could get the result. But that will be announced on December 1st. So this time next week, if people want to keep an eye out on that to see who wins. But as always, we'll have that covered on next week's podcast. So that's all the news for today. As you can see, as you probably heard, it's a very varied, a lot of news from around the world in lots of different sports. And we'll be back next time with even more news.
And that's our show for this week. Don't forget you can find the show notes and the links to all the stories that we cover here on the WIS Sports Desk at the website at wisports.com. Just use the drop-down menu under Listen, and you'll find the WIS Sports Desk and all the episodes for that show and for many others here at WIS Sports. And if you're already listening on the website, don't forget you can also listen on any podcast app. Just look for WIS Sports or WIS Sports Desk. And whilst you're on the app, we would love it if you have time to leave us a review or a rating, because that helps others find the show. And as always, you can follow us on social media at Wisp Sports, and you can follow Nancy at Nancy_Gillen. And I'll be back right here with Nancy next week, same time, same place. So until then, thank you for listening.